Super Mario 64 is widely regarded as one of the best ways to take a franchise from 2D to 3D, whilst simultaneously receiving critical acclaim across the board, setting the standard for 3D games going forward as well as imprinting gamers' love for Nintendo universally, receiving a 94 on Metacritic, and paving the way for the evolution of a genre. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that Nintendo was looking to make a sequel. So why didn't we ever get one? Well, we almost did. Today we will be discussing Super Mario 64 2, which is commonly confused with Super Mario 128. The two names will get muddled at some points because Nintendo conveniently named multiple projects Super Mario 128. For the purpose of this video, I will be referring to the Super Mario sequel as Super Mario 64 2. Without further ado, let's begin. It is well known that the Nintendo 64DD was a commercial failure, and it sent Nintendo's plans into a downward spiral as they scrambled to figure things out through the late 90s. If you are unfamiliar with the 64DD, I have a development video on it, which I will link in the cards above, or in the pinned comment section below. I recommend checking it out to put things into better context. With the 64DD issues, Nintendo was forced to port a lot of games to GameCube, as well as cancel projects outright. Our story begins in early 1997, when we first heard mention of the title from Shigeru Miyamoto himself in a Nintendo Power interview that asked him the following: "What can you tell us about Super Mario RPG 64 and Super Mario 64 2? To which Miyamoto replied, "Super Mario RPG 64 has a team of about 20 people working on it now and should be done by the end of next year. We're just getting started on the second Super Mario 64 game." Later that year, in December of 1997, in an interview with 64 Dream magazine, Miyamoto discusses how the development is progressing when asked, "Do you feel an attachment to Luigi?" To which he replied, "I certainly do. He's in Mario 64 2. We're in the middle of preparing Mario 64 2 for release on the 64DD. I'd like to take advantage of the 64DD's ability to store information. As of now, Luigi's also a full part of the game, but we haven't started thinking about two-player gameplay with Mario and Luigi yet. We'll tackle that once we've got the system ironed out. We've figured out the processing power issues, so we could do it if we tried. How many Luigi fans do you suppose there are? If Luigi's really that popular, maybe I'll make a green box for Mario 64 2. There are other interviews that occurred during this time period. However, I could not accurately source them, so I will not be including those as part of this video. The next time we would hear anything from Nintendo officially about the project would be in Nintendo Power issue 104 in January of 1998, where fans will send emails to Dan Owsen. At the time, Dan was part of Nintendo's product development team and a writer for the official Nintendo Power website. He was asked, "Will there be sequels for Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64? To which he replied, "Super Mario 64 2 have been announced, but there are no release dates yet." Mr. Miyamoto has said that many things that didn't make it into the first game, such as the ability to ride Yoshi, would be present in the sequel. This definitely suggests that the game was being actively worked on, as well as a lot of the fundamentals were in place. However, if we fast forward 11 months later, the information Dan provided contrasted with an interview Miyamoto had with Nintendo Power Source magazine on November 19, 1998, which, when asked about Super Mario 64 2, Miyamoto stated, "Well, for over a year now at my desk, a prototype program of Luigi and Mario has been running on my monitor. We've been thinking about the game, and it may be something that could work on a completely new game system. It's fair to say that this falls in line with the timeline of the 64DD being a failure for Nintendo. They had already cut ties with the idea of developing new projects using that technology and were likely looking forward towards the GameCube. At this point in 1998, the GameCube had not been fully realized. Keep in mind that the GameCube released in Japan on September 14th in 2001. It was known under the codename of Dolphin. In August of 1999, IGN64 interviewed Miyamoto and asked if Super Mario RPG 2 would be the last Mario game for the Nintendo 64, to which Miyamoto replied, It's really dependent on how we're going to make the transition to the next system. We do still have something in the works for the Nintendo 64 in regards to Mario though. This snippet made fans hope that there was still a chance for Mario 64 2 to still make it onto the system. Then the infamously confusing GameCube demo drops for the Nintendo Space World event on August 24, 2000. The demo was a tech demonstration for the GameCube's abilities, designed to show off its processing power. It was named Super Mario 128. Development of this demo was led by Yoshiaki Koizumi, who would later become the director of Super Mario Galaxy for the Wii. The demo would show that the GameCube was capable of displaying 128 mini Mario figures independently walking around on the spherical board. An amazing feat for the time. While the demo was impressive, it definitely didn't help the massive amount of hype that was being generated for the long-awaited Mario 64 sequel. Keep in mind Super Mario 64 was released in 1996. It had now been 4 years without a follow-up game. Titles like the Ocarina of Time released in 1998 and received a sequel game on the 64 that came out in 2000, which Miyamoto also worked on. It's easy to see why fans were wondering where the 64 2 was, especially since it kept being talked about through various official channels. In the following year at Space World 2001, Super Mario Sunshine was unveiled. A game which confused a lot of fans, as clearly this was the title that should have been the long-awaited Mario 64 2 but wasn't. The gameplay mechanics were very similar, with some new features like the flood device being added to make it stand apart. Fans hoping for the true 64 2 were beginning to think the game would never be made. It was also in 2001 that Super Smash Bros. Melee released with a battle stage called Super Mario 128. Where the player has to fight off 128 mini Marios. This clearly was a tease from Nintendo, but players couldn't make much sense of it. It's now the year 2002. This year is very significant, because it is at this point that something important happens. Miyamoto has an interview with Japan's weekly Playboy magazine. A very strange place to give an interview. But I don't pick the sources for this video, and I'm not Miyamoto. Anyways, he stated the following: the Mario 128 game and the Pikmin 2 title that were shown at the GameCube unveiling are still in development. I believe that with this game you'll be able to feel the newness that was missing from Super Mario Sunshine. The game wasn't new and different enough to get the sales we expected. When you have to start thinking about raising the number of consoles in people's homes, you realize that having a lot of brand names is important. But I still want to make new things. This interview is significant because of two things. It confirms that Super Mario Sunshine was not Super Mario 64 2, but also, Miyamoto has never previously referred to Mario 64 2 as Super Mario 128. All the language he has previously used running up until this point, he has always called it Mario 64 2, which suggests that Super Mario 128 is a completely different project. He also expressed how Super Mario Sunshine was too similar to 64, thus it didn't generate the console sales that the GameCube needed, whilst he also wanted to work on something new. This is where the real hope of getting a true sequel to Super Mario 64 begins to fade away. While personally I understand Miyamoto's approach of always wanting to innovate and create new things, sometimes fans just want more of the same. It's one of the main reasons a new F-Zero title hasn't been made. Miyamoto has stated that he can't think of anything new to do with the series. Fast forward to 2003. In the September issue of Nintendo's official magazine for the UK, Miyamoto was asked why there was nothing on Mario 128 at that year's E3. Miyamoto said, "No kidding. At E3 the question I was asked the most was, where is Mario 128? But I can't say anything now. Sorry, I can't say anything concrete yet. We're making it, of course, and as far as Mario games go, I want to make this different, but still feel like a Mario-style game." It's clear that not only were fans pestering him about it, but 128 was not going to be 64 2. So what became of this new 128 title? 2004. E3 happens. The Wii console was revealed, but at the time it was known by its code name, Revolution. There were no reveals for Mario 128. GameSpy asked Miyamoto about it at the conference. It's moving along secretly like a submarine under the water. When developing, we often look at the different hardware and run different experiments on it and try out different ideas. There have been a number of different experiment ideas that we have been running on the GameCube. There are some that we have run on DS, and there are other ideas too. At this point, I just don't know if we will see that game on one system or another. It is still hard for me to make that decision. I am the only director on that game right now. I have the programmers making different experiments, and when I see the results, we will make the final decision. From this interview, it's fair to say that even the 128's future was beginning to look bleak. This further is confirmed in an interview later that year, in November 2004 with Japan's Famitsu magazine. Miyamoto discussed how the Zelda title for the GameCube will be in playable form for the next E3, whereas Mario's 128 status was more unknown. Miyamoto said the following: "We're still not sure if the games will go on the GameCube. We're currently in development with Mario 128, which people throughout the world have been wondering about. We're now at the state of conducting various experiments with Mario, so until a release has been set, we cannot make the game public." The term Mario 128, by the way, is just a tentative name based on the game's theme. It's clear Miyamoto is talking about Mario 128 from the perspective of it being the next installment in the Mario franchise, rather than a true sequel to any games that have previously been released. It's now the year 2005. Reggie Fils-Aime, who was Nintendo of America's Vice President of Marketing, at GDC was asked when the public would see more of Super Mario 128, to which he stated that 128 would make an appearance at this year's E3. E3 rolls around and there was no showing for the title. Reggie was asked in a GameSpot interview at the event as to why the title had not been shown, to which he replied, "I can only show what Mr. Miyamoto gives me to show, but that the game did exist and I have seen bits and pieces of it." Crazy to think it had been 5 years at this point since the beginning to the Mario 128 hype, but so little was known about the title. A few months after E3 had passed, Wired News interviewed Miyamoto and they discussed the Mario series. This interview gives us a lot of insight into how Mario 128 didn't seem to have a fundamental direction yet. Wired started off by asking specifically about the Super Mario Bros. Title, which had recently been re-released for the handheld market. This is the first traditional side-scrolling Mario game Nintendo has made since 1991. Why wait this long to do a new Mario game in the original style? Miyamoto replied, "Because we'd spent all this time working on 3D Mario games. And of course, when we had Rare developing the side-scrolling Donkey Kong Country games, we were able to rely on them, which kept us from coming back to side-scrollers for a long time." Wired News followed this up with, "But there's still no sign of the long-awaited Mario 128 for GameCube." Miyamoto answered, "It's still floating around. We're searching for that fundamental idea that's going to drive the next 3D Mario game. But we're not sure when that's going to jump out at us. We're doing lots of tests with small groups." Wired followed up with, "If that's the case, if the design process is still at the point where you're doing experiments and tests, is it even possible that Mario 128 could come out on GameCube at this point? Or is it definitely a Revolution title? And if so, that means there will be no new GameCube Mario platform games announced." Miyamoto answered, "We think we want it on Revolution. The Mario team can't create too many games at the same time, so they're concentrating on the Revolution." Well, it seems clear at this point that it definitely wasn't coming out on the GameCube. That means that Super Mario Sunshine was the only 3D Mario platformer title that GameCube would be receiving. In 2006, we finally received the answers about the fate of Mario 64 2. Fans had been wondering for a long time, but all it did was confirm their worst fears. Miyamoto had done an interview for the Japanese magazine Nintendo Dream in their 10th anniversary issue. The Nintendo Dream was the magazine known as the 64 Dream, but it rebranded after the GameCube had launched. In that interview, he was asked about the missing 64 sequel. It was being made for the 64DD. You said in an interview in the September 1997 issue that Luigi is also in it. Miyamoto paused. "I'm sorry. I've forgotten. However, I believe it's become other games. To which Nintendo Dream followed up with, as in the game systems are being used in other games. Miyamoto's response contained the final bit of information available about the fate of the 64 too. From the time that we were originally making Mario 64, Mario and Luigi were moving together. But we couldn't get it working in the form of a game. That's the end of this unfortunate tale of the lost sequel. A game that never really materialized, that was constantly confused with Mario 128, and marks the end of our hopes of revisiting the world that we all cherished in Super Mario 64. Peach's castle and its paintings were not meant to be something for us to revisit. In that very same magazine interview, we also find out more about Mario 128. When asked about Mario 128, he said the following: "We've been experimenting all this time. Some percentage is included as Mario Galaxy on the Wii. Mario 128 was a test concept for Mario. So, for instance, the parts in Mario Galaxy where you're running around on the surface have come from Mario 128. We ran many tests to get a good feeling when the player is running around, which is a big part of Mario Galaxy's theme." The Dream interview was in July of 2006. Mario Galaxy had not been released at this point. It would end up coming out in November of 2007. But it's very clear that there are some striking similarities between the Space World demo and the finished Galaxy game. The idea of Mario running around on a spherical object, with the camera following him, definitely is similar. This is confirmed by our final mention of Mario 128 by Miyamoto in a speech at GDC in 2007. The one question I'm always asked is, what happened to Mario 128? The purpose of that demo was to show how the new technology in the GameCube could dynamically change the nature of Mario games. So when people ask me what happened to it, I'm always at a loss as to how to answer it, because most of you have already played it, but you played it in a game called Pikmin. This game featured one element of Mario 128 that allowed a large number of characters to operate independently and as a group. It's advanced AI. But of course, if I was to tell you all that this is what happened to Mario 128, you'd all be pretty angry. So you'll be experiencing another element of Mario 128 fairly soon. In Super Mario Galaxy, you'll be playing on numerous spherical stages, and this was one of the experiments we were conducting at the time of Mario 128. You'll be able to play Super Mario Galaxy later this year. And with that speech, we finally are able to conclude what happened to Mario 128. It was simply meant to be a tech demo at the end of the day, even though Miyamoto at times gave conflicting information in interviews. The best way to understand it is, the gameplay elements were broken up into the Galaxy series for its camera controls, its gravity, and how Mario moved around the sphere. The mini Mario elements and being able to show so many characters on screen walking around independently was used for the Pikmin series. In conclusion, Miyamoto is a brilliant game designer, and his approach to needing sequels to have new mechanics or something that is different for them to be successful is what at the end of the day keeps Nintendo innovative and fresh. However, it is disappointing for fans of some series when you realize that you may never be able to revisit games or locations you love, based on the fact that Nintendo will always be hunting for something new. Games like Paper Mario have suffered from this constant need to innovate, when the mechanics from older titles were pretty much on point. I don't believe we always need to have something new in terms of a place or gameplay if there are new enemies or quests to complete. Sometimes that's all fans want. Super Mario 64 2 was never meant to be at the end of the day, as something fresh was never discovered. It will be interesting to see how Breath of the Wild 2 plays when it comes out, but if this video is anything to go by, then it's likely Princess Zelda will play a key role in the game, and the ability to swap back and forth between her and Link is probably going to play a major mechanical role, just like Mario and Luigi was originally intended to do. At the end of the day, we can only wait and see. That's been it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to help support the channel. Leaving a comment about what you would like to see next helps me out heaps. Catch you all in the next one.